Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our workshop today on O visas. I'm really excited to do this workshop and share with you important information regarding O visas. This is one of my favorite visas to work on. It's where you get to be really creative, and a lot of people don't know that they may even qualify for an O visa. So I'm excited to share with you all my knowledge, and then hopefully what we will do is I'll go over the requirements for the O visa, and then I'll share with you some general tips and strategies for a strong application. After that, I'll go over some important legal considerations, and then we'll talk about career moves that you can make to qualify yourself for an O visa if right now you're not qualified. And then after that, we'll open it up for some questions. All right, so let's get started. So first, what are the general requirements for an O visa? An O visa is given to an individual who has extraordinary ability in the sciences, education, business, athletics, arts, motion picture, or television industry. The guidelines specifically mention these fields, but that doesn't mean that if you don't automatically fall into one of these categories, you won't qualify. Depending on your qualifications, we fit you into one of these categories, and that's where the creative process comes in. So how do you get an O visa? Whether you fit into a O1A or O1B, which I'll go into a little bit later, you can establish extraordinary ability by showing a one-time achievement of a significant award, such as a Grammy, an Olympic medal, or a Nobel Peace Prize. These are huge awards that are known throughout the world as demonstrating extraordinary ability. So if you have one of those, then it is pretty much guaranteed you're going to get an O visa. Most people don't qualify and don't have these kind of awards. That doesn't mean that they're not qualified for an O visa. And in fact, in recognition of this, what US has done is they've established a list of categories where if you can fit into 3 of them, you can establish extraordinary ability. So just because you haven't achieved a major award, it doesn't mean that you won't qualify for the O visa. I'll go a little bit more into these requirements and the categories in a bit. It's important for you to have a consultation and to have an itinerary. So if you have one employer, you have to put down what you will be doing for that employer. If you have multiple employers, then it's very, very important that you have a very clear itinerary. An itinerary is a document where you list all the employers that you have, the different jobs or events that you'll be engaging in, where they'll take place, and it basically lays out that you have employment for the time period for which you are requesting a visa. So an O visa, you can get that for up to 3 years. It doesn't mean you have to apply for the full 3 years, but if you want the full 3 years, you have to make sure that you list enough events or employment to get that 3-year period. And then it's important to remember that you can continuously get 1-year renewals if you continue the employment, or you can do a whole new 3-year renewal. And we'll discuss this a bit more later. The other requirements are that you need an employer and employee relationship for an O visa. This means that you need somebody to petition for you. Whether it's a company or an individual, somebody needs to file the O visa petition. That's the general requirement. In some situations, if you are self-employed and you own a company, you could potentially self-petition for yourself. In that circumstance, you have to still establish an employer-employee relationship between you and your employer. We have more information about this available on our website, but essentially that's a circumstance where you have to show there's a board of directors or other person who has authority over you. They have the ability to fire you. They have some say in your day-to-day responsibilities. So essentially there is some sort of employer-employee relationship. And the other thing is, if you are trying to qualify for an O visa based on a field that requires high education requirements, let's say you have a background in engineering, then you need to demonstrate that you meet those requirements. So let's talk about the O1A. The O1A is for extraordinary ability in the sciences, athletics, or business. And there's two ways that you can do this. As I mentioned previously, you can get a one-time significant achievement award, such as a Nobel Peace Prize or an Olympic medal, or you can satisfy three of the following criteria. So what is the criteria for the O1A? The criteria includes the following: receipt of lesser nationally and internationally recognized prizes for excellence in respective field. So let's say you didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize, or you didn't win a Grammy. Well, we'll talk about that for the O1B. But let's say you didn't get a major award that's internationally recognized. If you still received some awards that are known in your country or in your community that have a selective process for getting nominated and then for winning, that can still qualify. And that's a criteria. That's one of the categories in which you can establish that you meet extraordinary ability. The next one is membership in associations within the field that require judgment by experts in the field. So if you are a member of an organization that requires high achievements to join, it can't just be an association that you pay and anyone can join. It has to be one where you have to have certain qualifications. So let's say you have to have certain educational requirements or 10 years of experience, or somebody has to nominate you and everybody else that has joined also has similar qualifications. That would be a way in which you can show that you meet this category. The next one is publish writing about the individual in major publications within the field or appearance in other major media for accomplishments. So if there are articles written about you, if you'd appear on TV, on the radio, that would satisfy this category. And they have to be major publications and they have to be related to your field. So if you're a scientist and you're appearing in an art magazine, that wouldn't work. If you're in the education and you appear in an education magazine that's very well recognized, then that could work. Participation as a judge of the work of others in the field, either individually or in a panel. This is one that's very underutilized. If someone invites you to speak on a panel at an event, at a conference, or even a workshop like the one that I'm doing today, and many people attend, and you engage in some sort of judging, that's a way in which you can meet this criteria. And often there are competitions within the industry, depending on whatever industry you're in, where you can engage in that type of activity where you're judging. And if you can show that you were selected to be a judge because of your qualifications, you can meet this criteria. And this is one of the ones where they don't question as much as long as you can provide the documentation to establish this. The next one is original contributions of major significance to the field. This one is not that easy to meet. So we're talking about, let's say in the sciences, if you have a patent for something, that's a way to meet it. If you came up with some new formula, if you came up with some sort of new invention or something like that, that contributes to the field in a way that hasn't been contributed to before. It's very original, it's new, other people are taking that into account in their work. That's what would meet this criteria for this requirement. The next one is authored scholarly articles that were published in esteemed publications or journals within your field. So if you have written articles and you are published, this would meet the criteria for this requirement. The next is serving an important capacity for organizations within the field that have a distinguished reputation. So when I say important capacity, I mean leadership roles. If in the past you've worked for organizations, companies, nonprofits, or a project where you played a significant leadership role, and you can show that the decisions that you made impacted what other people did or the success of the project or company, then you can establish that you're extraordinary based on this requirement. And then finally, receiving a high salary or remuneration for work compared to others in the field. So if you get a high salary, and it can't just be that it's a high number, it has to be a high salary for the field that you're in. So if in your field, the average person receives, let's say, $60,000 for the type of work that you would do, but you receive $100,000, then that would meet the requirement for this category, the criteria for this category. It's not enough just to meet a high number. So let's say if you get paid $200,000 for the type of work that you do, and that's the average, you need to be making more than that, 400,000, because that's above the normal for whatever it is you do in your field. So the number can vary depending on your field and what it is. Additionally, it doesn't have to be an annual number. It could also be what you get paid on an hourly basis. A good way to learn about this or seeing where your salary stands is by looking at the US Department of Labor statistics, and also state by state, the wage varies. So there's some creative arguing that your attorney can do over here to establish that you get a high salary. This requirement also says remuneration. So remuneration refers to other types of compensation, such as getting, let's say, access to the gym. Your company pays for that. Your company is willing to pay for your flights to the whatever city you want to go to, or that's necessary to go to complete your projects. They cover your rent or some other type of compensation that's not a wage. That would be a great way to show that you're extraordinary, because the company is only willing to do these extra things like your gym membership, health insurance, extra things, only if they're really invested in you and you're extraordinary, because they wouldn't just do that for the average employee. So that's a great way to meet that requirement. Now we're looking at the O1B visa. So remember, the O1A is for business, sciences, education, athletics. The O1B is for people in the arts and television and motion picture industry. And for the O1B, it's distinction that you need to establish. And I'll go over that in a little bit. And you can establish distinction, again, similar to the first one, the O1A, by showing a one-time significant award, such as a Grammy, Academy Award, a Tony, any of these big awards that are recognized internationally, or one of the three criteria in this list of requirements over here. You'll notice some overlap between this category list of criteria over here and also in the O1A. And that's because there's some leeway in the arguing that could be made with slight distinctions because of the different requirements for the O1A and the O1B. So for the O1B, you have to establish that you have extraordinary ability through one of the following. The first is performed and will continue performing as a lead or star role in productions that have a distinguished reputation established by reviews, publicity, endorsements. So what a lot of people think that this one, this requirement is saying is that you have to show that in the past, you had a lead or star role in events, or in the future, you will have a lead or star role. No, what this is saying is you need to have both. You need to show that in the past, you have already performed in a lead role or star role, and in the future, you will be doing the same for the employment that you're seeking the O visa for. It's really important to do that. And the other thing is, it says distinguished reputation. So not only do you have to have a lead role, performed in a lead role in the past, and will be doing so in the future, but it has to be for events and things that are distinguished. So for key events, well-known events. It can't be for something that's in a community theater. It can't be something that only 5 people attend. It has to be something that's well publicized. Many people have attended. They know the company, they know the event. So let's say you are a dancer. It has to be for a well-known production that is attended by at least 50 to 100 people, and there are a lot of reviews. It's written about in the Times or some other recognized publication. It can't be something 5 people attend, never publicized anywhere. So that's really, really important. The second one here is performed and will continue to perform in a lead or star role for organizations that have a distinguished reputation established by articles in reputable publications. So there's a bit of overlap between the first one and the second one over here. The first one is for performing in the past and in the future in the lead or star role in productions. And this one is for organizations. And the reason why it's important is O1B is for in the arts and motion picture and television industry. So you could either qualify by showing that you had a lead or star role in the past and will in the future in a production, or by working for a distinguished company. So let's say you work for Universal Studios. That's a well-known company, or a very well-known ballet company. Then this is what you would use to meet this requirement over here. And that's different from the first one where it would be a production, let's say a play. And then for the second one, it would be the specific organization or theater, etc. So remember to keep the distinction. Sometimes people are able to use the same evidence for both the first one and the second one, but you just have to argue it in a different way. The third is gained national or international recognition for accomplishments as evidenced by critical reviews or published writings in major publications. So this one is where articles, press releases, things in the news, magazines, this is a great way to establish that you meet the criteria for this. And basically you want to show that you're known throughout the US, or if you're outside the US, usually it's outside the US in your home country, and you have received some sort of recognition. So people know you in your country, or you've already established some sort of recognition outside of your country, including the US and other countries. And the way to do that is through major publications. So let's say you're an architect. Architectural Digest is a good way. If you're a model and you've appeared in Elle or Cosmopolitan, Vogue, these are good ways to establish that you meet this criteria for this requirement. The other one is have a record of commercial and or critically acclaimed successes established by title, reviews, box office receipts, film or television ratings, and other achievements reported in reputable publications. So this one, there's a bit of overlap, but here we want to show that the events or things that you participated in led to some sort of financial benefit, right? So it's a record of commercial success. You are getting paid well for what you are doing, or there are all these reviews about the kind of work that you've done, press releases, their ratings online. That's what you would use for this one. If you can get ratings, statistics, you would use that for this. The next is receive notable recognition for accomplishments from organizations, critics, government agencies, or other established experts in the field with testimonials that demonstrate the authority and expertise of the body bestowing recognition upon the individual. So this requirement is a really important one, because this is where you get testimonials from other people who are known in the field, who are considered experts. You don't have to directly know the people, but they should know about your work and that you are somebody with this unique talent, and they can attest to that. It's very important that you get it from people who are related to your field and have some sort of relevance to it. They have to be established experts in it. And you have to be able to provide documentary evidence that establishes that this person is qualified to make an assessment of your qualifications. So it's a little bit of a, kind of creative argument that takes place over here. You have to establish the credibility of the person writing the testimony for you, the letter of recommendation, and then they have to give a great opinion of your unique and extraordinary abilities. And then finally, receiving a high salary or remuneration. So just like for the O1A, here you have to show that you make more than what the average person does in your industry and field. And if you get other types of non-paid compensation, such as getting expenses paid for, flights, etc., then this is one way to establish that. So now that we've established the different ways in which you can meet the requirement for showing you're extraordinary, what does it mean to be extraordinary? So it's two different kind of definitions. For the sciences, education, business, or athletics, you have to establish that you're at the top of your field. So that's what it means to be extraordinary for those fields. And then for the arts, you have to establish distinction. Distinction means a high level of achievement. And the key here is showing that you have skill and recognition that's far above other people in your industry. So basically for this one is showing recognition. Recognition is the important part, that you're well known, your work has been promoted, and that makes sense, right? Because this is for the arts, the motion picture and television industry. And it's important to note that it could be either internationally or in your country. So don't be discouraged if people don't know you outside of your country. If you can establish that within your country, you're very well known or at the top of your field, then you can meet the requirements to be extraordinary and the definition of extraordinary. So what are some strategies and tips for a strong application? The first thing is you have to provide substantial evidence to show that you meet each of the requirements. It's not enough that you just give your resume or your portfolio. You have to outline how you meet each of those requirements, whether it's proving that you're a member of an organization, or that you were judged on a panel, or you appeared in a lead or starring role. You have to provide evidence to establish every single element of one of those requirements. Otherwise, they will not give you that requirement. They will not state that you have fulfilled that requirement. So you literally have to spell every single thing out, not just by writing it, but with documentary evidence. The other thing is you have to provide contracts or deal memos that outlines the terms of the employment. So who is hiring you? What is the position they're hiring you for? What are your job duties and responsibilities? What are you getting paid for it? And it's very important to make that information clear. USCIS can deny your application or issue a RFE if you do not provide that information. Are you missing the employer's address? That's very, very important. Sometimes you may be working for somebody who is an individual and they work from their home. Even if they do, you need to provide an address. And then your job duties. You can't just state that they're hiring you to be a designer or they're hiring you to be an engineer or project manager. You have to outline what exactly are your job duties, because then you need to make the argument that these job duties fall within your field of extraordinary ability and you are qualified to provide those duties and responsibilities, meet those qualifications that not everybody can meet. The other thing is getting strong letters of recognition. So I discussed this a little bit. When you get your letters of recognition or your letters of recommendation, make sure you establish that the person is qualified and that they're an expert in the field, and therefore they can make an assessment about your work. Make sure the letters of recommendation discuss specific things you've done. A general letter of recognition or recommendation is not going to be sufficient. This is your opportunity to make an argument about the kind of work that you do and how you stand out. So get strong letters. You can get a combination of letters from people you've worked with, people who know you on a personal level but are also within the industry. And you can even get people you don't know to do a review of your work and provide an assessment. The other thing is, when you are working with your employers, whether it's one employer or multiple employers, make sure that you are having a strong communication, that you are having strong communications with them. And what I mean by strong is that you're in contact with them and they're on board with you applying for this O visa and providing you all the documents that you need. So there's a lot of documents that are needed, and sometimes employers become a little nervous about signing the employer letter stating that you will be employed on the condition that you get the O visa. So just make sure that they understand the requirements for the O visa, what is required of them, and if necessary, have them speak with your attorney just so they're not concerned and they don't back out or don't want to provide you, don't want to be one of your employers or petition for you. I mentioned this earlier, but it's really important to also have a very clear itinerary. So make sure you put in all the important information, especially for your employers. And finally, you need to have a strong cover letter. If you have an immigration attorney, they will outline how you meet all the legal requirements, and they'll make sure that they connect all the different dots. If you are not using an immigration attorney, make sure that you spend the time to outline how you meet every single requirement and discuss every single way in which you're extraordinary by fitting into at least one of those three categories. Or the other thing is, if you don't directly fit into one of these three categories, either for the O1A or for the O1B, you can also provide comparable evidence. So what is comparable evidence? This is evidence of, let's say, lesser known awards, or let's say you're very well known in the community. So community recognition, that could be a comparable type of way of demonstrating that you meet extraordinary ability. Or let's say you're in an organization that doesn't require that high requirements, qualifications to be a member, but there's some unique things that you have to do. That could be a comparable category. Usually requires a bit of unique and creative thinking, and your immigration attorney can help you figure out if you have a comparable category. Or there's like, you have all this evidence in something that's not listed there. That's how you can also show that you have comparable evidence. So what are some important legal considerations before applying? The most important thing is make sure you understand all the requirements of the O1 visa and that you qualify before you submit that. So if you're not sure that you qualify and you send out this application, you're going to pay the fees, you're going to wait, and there's a very strong possibility that it can get rejected. So you want to avoid that scenario. And especially if there's a time crunch and you need this O visa, you don't want to risk sending things out and getting an RFE or a denial that will delay a decision or potentially put you out of status. So with that said, it's really important for you to remember certain things about your immigration status when you're applying for the O visa. The first thing is, if you're here on a visitor visa and you're applying for O visa, make sure you do a change of status well before your expiration date. You can file an O visa and do something called premium processing, where you get a decision in 15 days. But keep in mind, this doesn't mean you should wait 15 days before your visitor visa status changes, because that's not going to be enough time to put together your O visa application. It takes about at least a month, and sometimes you can do it in 2 or 3 weeks to put together a strong O visa application. So start the process at least 2 to 3 months earlier and submit it a month ahead of your visitor visa or any other visa status expiring, so that if they need you to submit more evidence or something else comes up, there's enough time for you to deal with that before you run out of status. When you are here on a visitor visa or another visa, and you do not submit an application within the time period, you risk being here unlawfully and gaining unlawful presence. So if you are in the US and let's say you submitted your O visa application and your visitor visa or other visa that you're on has expired and you haven't gotten a decision in 180 days, then hypothetically you risk being subjected to the 3-year bar if you leave the country. So my recommendation is, if you see yourself reaching that 180 days, leave the country before you reach the 180 days so that you're not subject to the 3-year requirement. And file for that O visa application well in advance so that this is not even an issue that you have to think about. And then also keep in mind, if you stay in the US for more than 1 year without any status, you can be subject to the 10-year bar if you leave the United States and try to come back. And that's not something you want to deal with because that will really limit your chances and your opportunities in returning to the United States. If you have other inadmissibility issues, such as the way that you entered, or if you previously have some application that was denied, consult with an immigration attorney so that they can see if that prevents you from being eligible for an O visa, or if there is some sort of waiver or something that they can do for you to address that. The other thing that's very important, let's say you get your O visa and it has been approved and you're here and you're working. And you're here on either for one employer, working for one employer, or multiple employers. Even though you get the O visa, let's say for a maximum of 3 years or whatever period you got it for, even though you have that validity period, if the employment terminates, the visa also terminates because it's tied to the employment. So if you're working for multiple employers, and this happens often, and all the projects that you had lined up fall through, unless you line up other projects, you risk being out of status and your O visa terminates. So make sure you secure other O visa employment. If you're an artist or someone else who's here in multiple employment, you can get other employment that falls into your field that's similar. However, if you get, let's say you're working for multiple employers part-time and all of a sudden you get a full-time employer, or you're changing your working for someone full-time and you're changing the employer, that can be a material change. And it's not enough to just amend your application. You have to get a whole new O visa application for that employer. So depending on what happens with your employment, either you may be out of status with your O visa, like your O visa may terminate, or you may need to amend your application, or you may need to file a whole new O visa application. It's really, really important that you check in with an attorney when there's a change with your employment status so that they can make sure you can take the appropriate action to ensure that you comply with immigration law and that you're not out of status. Okay. So those are important legal considerations. And of course, there are some case-by-case considerations that come into play, which you can discuss with your immigration attorney. Now let's talk about career moves that you can take to become qualified. So a lot of people, they're very talented, but the thing is, they don't have documentation to establish how talented they are or how extraordinary they are. The key to O visas is really documentation. And if you're not qualified today, it doesn't mean you can't become qualified tomorrow. So if you think you're interested in an O visa, I highly recommend meeting with an O visa immigration attorney and having them look at your current body of work or your qualifications and resume, and they can tell you that as of this moment, what do you qualify for? Or hypothetically, what are some of the three categories, some of the three of the 8 or 6 or whatnot, categories you can fit into if you do certain things. So what are some things you can do? Let's say if you're an athlete, you can qualify for high-level tournaments. You can participate in competitions that are very well known. They don't have to be on an international level, such as the World Cup, but they could be something that's very well known within your city or your country, where a lot of people attend and you need to go through a number of different steps to engage in that competition. That's one thing you could do. You could also work to land a major role if you are an actor in a film or performance. And it doesn't have to be something that everybody sees, that's advertised everywhere. You just have to show that there's some level of work that you have to do to get that role or that job position. It just can't be something that anybody can get. So your attorney can help you come up with a creative argument or give you some advice on some things that you can do within your industry to sort of amp up your portfolio, and not just amp up your portfolio, but make you qualified in your career so that you can get other gigs, events, job offers that then 2 years down the road qualify you for the O visa. You can also teach. So it doesn't matter what your field is or what your industry is. Teaching is a great way of showing that you're extraordinary. Because why would somebody hire you to teach? They only hire you to teach when you have a certain level of knowledge that's above average, and you can impart that to other people, or other people want to hear that from you. So whether it's in the sciences, the business, the arts, go and teach a class, do a workshop. That's a great way to make yourself qualify for an O visa. And it's also a great way to expand your portfolio or your resume. The other thing is establish a strong social media presence. Right now, that plays a big role, especially in the arts industry, but it doesn't mean that if you're in the business or sciences or education that you can't do the same. So whether it's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, if you have a lot of followers, that can be a good way of showing that you're extraordinary. You don't need to have millions. You can have, but you do need to have a significant number. It can't be 2,000 followers. It has to be at least 10,000. So it has to be something that the reasonable person looking at it can say, okay, this person has a lot of followers. It makes sense that they're extraordinary. I can see that they're extraordinary. The other thing is have a good website. If you don't have an online presence, create an online presence. Put your portfolio on the internet. Make sure your website has your work, body of works, any clients you've worked for, any awards that you achieved. Because what's the first thing that a USCIS officer does? They go and they Google you. And this is especially critical in the arts and motion picture and television industry. If you have an online presence, if I can Google you and I see your name, then that tells me that you're extraordinary. So make it a strong online presence for yourself. Speak on panels and again, workshops. See if you can be invited to be a judge at a competition or some sort of event, even school presentations. That's something that you can do. And then additionally, in general, outside of sports competitions, other types of competitions, enter competitions, see what's required. Even if you're not a finalist, even if you don't win, the fact that you can get selected to be or to be nominated or be one of the finalists or semifinalists, that's something that can help establish your extraordinary ability for an O visa. So the really important thing that I'd like you to keep in mind is you may not know that you're extraordinary, but in fact could be extraordinary. It's just that it's not obvious to you. So an immigration attorney, what they can do for you is they'll ask you a series of questions and kind of figure out the things you've done in the past, the projects, your skill set, search for you online, take a look at your CV, and they can let you know that actually you do qualify for an O visa, or it's just one or two more things that you have to do before you become qualified for an O visa. So I hope that provided a good overview of the general requirements for an O visa, some strong tips, well, some tips for a strong O visa application, and then important things for you to keep in mind about your immigration status when applying for the O visa. Remember, always apply before your current visa expires. And if for some reason you're out of status and you're applying for an O visa, consult an immigration attorney. It's really unfortunate if you get approved for an O visa, but for some reason, because of some immigration reason, you can't come here on the O visa. That would be really, really unfortunate. And unfortunately, it does happen. So we want to avoid that situation. And finally, take these steps to enhance your career. Even if you're not qualified for an O visa now, you could be qualified for an O visa a year or two from now. With that said, let's open this up for a question and answer session. Yes.
If you are on a B1 inside the US as a tourist and you decide to apply for the O visa and it's granted, will it affect the fact that you change while you are inside the country instead of asking for the visa outside?
No. So something important to remember, when you are in the United States on any type of visa, you can hypothetically change to another type of visa. There are certain requirements for certain types of visa. For the O visa, when you're in the US, you can change your status as long as your visitor visa status hasn't expired, okay? That's really important. So file it before the visitor visa expires, and then what you get when the O visa is approved is O status. You don't get the O visa when it's approved. To get the O visa itself, you have to leave the country and go for an interview at the consulate, and then they'll stamp your passport with the visa. So that's the difference between O status and an O visa. Having the O status allows you to remain in the US even after your visitor visa expires and work over here. So that's the great thing. If you don't want to go back to your home country and you want to just stay here and change to the O1 or the O1B, you can do that.
People who enter with a B1, B2 and change for an F1 and stay inside the country, and then years after they leave the US, they have to present themselves at the airport to get another F1. So I was wondering if that applies also with the O.
Yes, so it's similar, right? When you change to an F status, a student status, you're just changing the status, you're not changing the visa. So anytime you're in the United States and you're changing the status without leaving, what you're doing is changing the status. You're not getting the different visa. So sometimes there are students here on a visitor visa, and then they apply for a student visa. They just get the status. They don't get the visa until they leave the United States. And when they re-enter, they have to apply for the visa, get the stamp, and come back. And it's the same thing with the O visa, with the H-1Bs. You don't get the visa. To get a visa, you have to physically go to a consulate and they have to stamp your passport and give you the visa. But it doesn't mean that if you don't have the visa, you can't work and stay here. Once you have that status, you can stay and work here on the O visa, on the O status. So I hope this was an informative and helpful presentation and workshop on the O visas, and that you have a better understanding of what is required to apply for an O visa, how you can make your application stronger, and more importantly, that even if you don't qualify for an O visa now, you could potentially qualify for one a few years from now. So thank you everyone for attending our event today, our workshop. Stay tuned and visit our website for future events and other visas. And if you have other questions, you can always email us and contact us for more information. All right, thank you very much. Take care and have a good night.